Hello and welcome to tonight's Wildlife Gardening Talk, which is proud to be part of Climate Week Northeast 2021. So Climate Week Northeast is an annual 10 days of fun, interesting and educational events here in the Northeast. It's designed to let you know more about what's going on here in our area and how you can live more sustainably. So we hope you enjoy the event and you also go on and have a look at some other events as part of Climate Week. So you can see the full programme of events at www.climateweekaberdeen.org, or you can check out Climate Week Northeast on Facebook. So on to the introduction. Well, who are we? Well, the organisers of tonight are Doug Gooday, who's one of the rangers from Aberdeenshire Council Ranger Service. He's just waving on the screen there. Now, Doug's internet can be a little bit unpredictable. So what he's done is he's provided some short video clips for us, and he'll also be available for questions at the end. We also have John Malster, who is a local business owner of CuramFyvie, which provides ecological advice and also local provenance wildflowers. And then you have me. My name is Alex, and I'm the coordinator for the North East Scotland Biodiversity Partnership. So I've been doing that the last almost 2 years, and before then I was a ranger for Aberdeen City Council. So very briefly, the partnership was set up back in 1996. If you have a look at the map on the screen, you'll see that we cover around 7,000 square kilometres of area, including Moray, Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen City, but excluding the Cairngorms National Park Authority area. We're made up of people from local councils, environmental organisations, wildlife charities, and also independent members. And I need to say a big thank you to our funding partners at the bottom of the screen for their continued support. We aim to help promote, protect, and improve the amazing local biodiversity we have in our corner of Scotland. And collaboration is always at the heart of our working. So just like tonight, we have 3 members of the partnership, and we're also part of Climate Week Northeast. So a quick outline for tonight. We're going to have a mix of speaking, some short videos, some interactive polls, and then of course lots of time at the end for your questions. We have a huge range of topics to cover around wildlife gardening, as you can see on the screen. And we could honestly spend hours on each of these topics individually, but instead we want to cover quite a good overview of lots of different points. So hopefully you're going to leave here tonight feeling inspired about the practical things that you can personally do to help support your local nature. And I'd like to encourage you to keep on learning after this. You can do this by going to our website, following us on Facebook, and also joining our Facebook wildlife gardening group. And we're a very friendly bunch, I promise. So I think it's important to say that the ideas that we talk about here can be used not only for gardens, big or small, rural or urban, but also areas such as school grounds and local green spaces. As you will have read when signing up for this event, there are over 15 million gardens in Britain, covering an area larger than all our national nature reserves put together. So if we manage these areas with wildlife in mind, it can make a huge difference. Why do we need to help our biodiversity? Well, globally, we're facing a biodiversity crisis because of factors such as habitat loss. In Scotland, unfortunately, we're no different. So I've got some figures there from the 2019 State of Nature report. And it shows that almost half of our species have decreased in population numbers in the past 10 years alone, and 11% of our species face extinction. So making our gardens places where wildlife can thrive can really help combat this. We are promoting an ecosystem approach. So that means our focus is bigger than just trying to help 1 or 2 specific species. An ecosystem is made up of all the living organisms there, plus how they interact with their physical environment and each other. So in nature, things don't tend to work very well in isolation. Everything's connected to each other by things such as food webs. One tree, for example, can act as a physical home for many different types of animals, such as birds and insects, and it can act as a food source for perhaps a different range of animals entirely as well. We want to make sure that we're providing the groundwork for a variety of different animals further up the food chain. And that means we need to make sure we've got the right habitats. Right habitats need the right plants and other physical structures. And this is how we're going to support the animals at the bottom of the food chain, by making sure that we've got that right foundation. And if you have a look on the screen, you'll see probably something you'd recognize from school, a classic sort of food pyramid. So you have all your leaves at the bottom that support a large number of invertebrates. And then these will be eaten by smaller birds. And then moving up the food chain, this would be eaten by a bird of prey, for example. We'll move on to the first video from Doug just now. So hopefully you can all hear this.
In 2004, our garden was very bare and devoid of any habitat of much value. There were several mature ash trees, some with holes occupied by tree sparrows and blue tits. A small area of lawn had been laid with slab paths, and a few non-native shrubs had been planted, so there was plenty of room for improvement. Leylandii hedging had been planted along the main access track and around part of the garden. I don't like Leylandii hedging, especially in a rural area, and removed a lot of it within a month of moving in. Leylandii is good for providing shelter for nesting and roosting birds and for spiders, but it provides very little food for any invertebrates when compared to native species of trees and shrubs. Invertebrates like earthworms, insects, spiders, mollusks and crustaceans are at the base of the terrestrial food webs, and other animals such as birds, amphibians, reptiles and mammals depend upon them. It is estimated that an adult blue tit needs to find around 10,000 caterpillars to feed the young during the 20 days before they fledge. And even seed-eating birds like many finches depend on insects to feed their young, as this food is high in proteins and fat needed by the growing chicks. The famous biologist Ed Wilson said the invertebrates are the little things that run the world. All gardening is about human intervention. Traditionally, it's been about imposing our will on nature and controlling what grows there. Gardening for wildlife has become popular in recent years, with a focus on garden features that benefit wildlife, such as plants for pollinators, ponds, bird boxes, bug hotels, and so on. Rewilding expands on this with a mindset that puts nature and natural processes first. To rewild a garden is to look at the land from nature's point of view and allow nature to take the lead wherever possible. From woodlands and scrub to grassland, wetlands and more, large natural landscapes contain many types of habitat. A garden, on the other hand, may have just one or two, but it can mimic the structure of wilder places with dips and hollows, water and insect-friendly plants at different heights.
So from the videos there, we would say that gardens do have some constraints. So not only the size of your area, but the kind of habitat that surrounds your garden. So Doug's rather large and lovely wildlife garden is surrounded by lots of intensively managed farmland. In an urban garden, you could be completely surrounded by buildings and not easily connected to any other green spaces. It could be that your area is very windy and exposed. It could be shaded for most of the day. Your soil could be quite dry or even waterlogged. Lots of things might affect what plants want to grow naturally in your bit of land. So do take a good look at the surrounding areas and have a look at what naturally grows there. That's a good indication of what you could have in there. The premise is the same for animals. So some animals such as mammals, birds and flying insects can travel quite a distance and might be able to make it to your garden. However, if specific animals are not naturally in the surrounding area and are not able to reach your garden, it probably doesn't really matter what you do to try and encourage them there, they won't turn up.
My strategy has been to provide habitat that would naturally be here if the land wasn't farmed so intensively. I don't have the large area needed for planting a new woodland, but I have been able to plant a shelter belt, hedges, small areas of willow scrub, burnside wet habitat, and a small wildflower grassland area. My hope was that these habitats would be suitable for native insects, birds and small mammals, and would also act as a habitat network to enable species to move through this intensively farmed barren area. There is no point in trying to grow plants that won't tolerate the northeast climate and the heavy, mildly acidic Aberdeenshire clay soil. Nor is there any point in trying to attract animal species that wouldn't naturally occur in an arable farmland environment.
Okay, so what type of plants do we want in our gardens? Well, in terms of flowering plants, we want flowers with different sizes and shapes to accommodate different species of pollinators. Some of our pollinators, such as moths, come out at night, so it might be useful to add some night flowering plants. We also want there to be flowering plants right across the entire growing season. So on the top right-hand side of the screen there, you can see some examples of plants suggested by Nature Scott, and they cover different seasons that those plants would grow in. Below this, I've taken a picture from the Bee Watch Aberdeen website, which can be particularly useful. One of the options on the website is to name some plants which you currently have in your garden, and it will then suggest for you plants that you could add to extend your flowering season. In general, we do find that native species, grown locally especially, are best for our pollinators. This is because they're used to growing in our chilly climate, and they also flower at the correct time of year in lines with things like emerging insects that we have locally. However, non-natives do also have a place because they can help extend things like your flowering year, and they can be quite attractive as well.
A lot of attention is currently given to providing advice on plants to grow to attract butterflies and other pollinating insects to the garden, such as growing a buddleia bush to attract butterflies. Though this advice is welcome and helps to raise awareness of the importance of insects, a lot of the advice is incomplete and ignores the often complex life cycles that many species have. For example, buddleias, Michaelmas daisies and sedum are good sources of nectar for butterflies, but you won't get many butterflies in your garden unless there is a nearby source of food for the larval stages of the caterpillars. Many butterflies and moths have particular larval food plants, such as nettles or sorrel, many of which are considered weeds by gardeners.
Okay, so as Doug was saying there, some plants act as larval food sources for insects, such as moth and butterflies. While some species are very specific about what they eat, others can be a little bit less fussy. Flowering plants can also be food for other insects, such as aphids and beetles, as well as birds and small mammals. So I've included some pictures of plants such as teasel and long grasses, which can provide structure to your garden in winter, as well as food for wildlife. It is also important to say that these plants can act as a home for our insects over winter. Therefore, instead of chopping everything down to the ground in autumn, quite often it's best to wait until springtime before chopping back any perennials. In terms of native versus non-native, I'm not a purist by any means. If you can aim for a majority of native species in your garden, then that's great. Traditional garden ornamental plants can also be included for more interest. I thought it was worthwhile to mention that when looking for plants, people often check the plants for pollinators sign. Now, the scientific evidence isn't 100% behind every plant that RHS is labelled this way. So just to say that the RHS is currently reviewing their list for these, so it might not be the same in the future as it is currently. In general, a rule though is to avoid anything that's been bred too extensively for its looks. So for example, double flowering varieties of trees and plants. And you can see the difference between different types on the screen there. So we've got some tulips and also some cherry blossom. So cultivars with double flowers have been bred where the stamens, the yellow parts of the flower, get replaced by more petals. So this means they're very low in pollen or even sterile. Even the ones that still have some stamens left are quite often very crowded with petals, and it means that insects can't reach the nectaries at the very base of the flower. So not great for wildlife. So a general rule is if you can see into the very center of the flower easily, including the yellow stamens, it should be okay for wildlife. For bulbs, there are a number of native and non-native plants that are good for our insects. Often they're some of the first plants to appear in springtime and help the earliest insects when they start emerging from winter. Planting advice for different bulbs can be quite specific, so I won't go into detail here. However, it's important to make sure that you're buying from a reputable supplier, and preferably ones that grow in the UK specifically. Some of these species are protected, so they should not be lifted from the countryside unless it's done by a certified supplier. So just something to watch out for there if you are buying these bulbs. Some other quick plant recommendations include traditional plants you would find in a herb garden, the bonus being that you can also use them for things like cooking. In terms of veg grown specifically for wildlife, you might want to consider growing things like carrots and anything in the garlic family. So as well as providing food for you, they're wonderful for insects if you let a few of your crops go to flower. For fruits, a variety of different soft fruits works well, from things like currants and wild strawberries to your fruit trees full of apples, cherries, pears and plums that work well in the northeast. Of course, it is worth saying that being a wildlife-friendly garden means being okay with letting some of your plants get nibbled and losing small amounts of your crop to the wildlife eating it. So just something to pay attention to there. And at this point, we're going to swap over to John, who's going to take over. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Great to see so many people. I'm specifically going to talk about certain plants that I personally love, and what you've heard so far from Alex and Doug is the overwhelming importance of structure and habitats. But I'm just going to highlight some of what I consider the most important species. So I'm going to see if I can do my share screen now. Okay, what I'm going to talk about first are the trees and shrubs you can have in your garden, and the first, yep. So what I basically want to look at is the ones I particularly love, and the ones that I would argue are the most important for wildlife. So if we have the next slide, Alex. And this we're lucky enough to have in our garden. As you can see, it's a birch. I took this photograph last autumn. And if you've got a big enough garden, birch is a fantastic tree for insect biodiversity, for example. We love to watch the blue tits seem to be in this tree every day, especially during the winter. You probably can't see them in the summer with the leaves, but in the winter, they seem to be there every day finding insects. So it's a fantastic tree. It's got the advantage over a lot of other of our larger trees in that it doesn't spread too much and does let through quite a lot of light. So for example, we've got a veg garden not far away, and it does prevent some of the light getting through, but we still manage to grow things. Could I have the next slide, please, Alex? This is also in our garden. This is pussy willow, goat willow, as it's properly called. If there was one tree that everybody should plant, this is the one. This is the top tree for wildlife, I would say, that's found in the UK and in our part of the world, certainly. So the very first thing they provide, and the next slide, please, Alex, is the actual pussy willows, which are just about coming out now, and so providing early pollen and nectar for the bees, for the first bumblebees, and of course honeybees I was seeing out last week as well. Next slide, please. And this is just the bark of the tree, the trunk of the tree, and it was just to say that you don't have to let it get a fairly large tree. The biggest it's going to get is about sort of 10 meters high maximum, I would say, probably not even that much. But you can, of course, pollard it, which means cutting it off at about 5 or 6 feet, or even keep it very low and keep it as a bush by cutting back every year. Next slide, please. And this is a close relative of the goat willow. This is grey willow, which is not quite such a top plant for wildlife, but still extremely good. And this is a hedge close to me of grey willow that a farmer has planted. And I'm going to come on to the point that willow has got so many other uses. But if I could have the next slide, please. For those of you that have got a tiny garden, this might be worth considering. This one's called Kilmarnock willow. This is in my neighbour's garden, and it was a variant that was found by horticulturalists back on the banks of the River Aire back in Victorian times, and he grafted it onto the goat willow base there. I believe you can actually just have the top bit as a sort of scrambling plant over the over your rockery, for example. But anyway, keep an eye for that one. Kilmarnock willow, and it doesn't grow to any more than about meter and a half. Next slide, please. This is at the bottom of our garden, and this is a row of hazels taken just the other day. These are the male catkins of hazel, you can see, and they're brilliant because they come out early winter, really, certainly in December, and they carry on right through to well, now they're still out at the moment and still providing food for insects. Our neighbour who lives just over the fence there didn't realise they were hazels, but was struck by how often she saw the red squirrels going in them, which you'll all know why they were doing that, for the nuts. Next slide, please. This one's jump position. This is going back to the willows, and just another of the smaller willows you could consider planting, especially if you're interested in basket making. This is purple willow, which doesn't grow to more than about 1.5 meters maximum, and is a beautiful fine stem and quite nice colours. It is another native. It's a rarer native than the other willows I've mentioned, but as you can see, quite a nice one. So could I have the next slide, please? And now we're going back to the hazel catkins, which is a shot just taken just yesterday, really. Next slide, please.
Oh, there we go.
If everybody could turn their heads a bit to the left, what this shot shows is another use for wood. I have become less and less keen with the whole idea of fire in the garden. And I think everything we produce has got its uses. So obviously you can't use every last bit of twig and wood that you have. So I make what I call a habitat pile. And this is just a load of wood stacked together. And whenever we go anywhere near it, birds fly out of it. And where there's birds, that will be because there's plenty of insects. And recently I was on a webinar, and it was being given by a beetle expert lady from the Museum of Scotland, and I asked the question, what were the main things she would do in the garden to attract beetles, and the first one she mentioned was a pile of wood, pile of logs. So I think that's me having covered the trees and shrubs. And so if we could go on to the next slide. And now I'm going to talk about some of our favourite wildflowers. The RHS is the Royal Horticultural Society, and I think Alex has already mentioned it. And they did some research a few years ago looking at what was best for biodiversity in your garden. And remember, this is not a conservation organisation we're talking about, so it's the Royal Horticultural Society. But their two conclusions were natives certainly are better for a wider range of insects, and their other main conclusion was plant really densely. Could I have the next slide, please? I've got a small area in the garden which I call our orchid patch, and these are northern marsh orchids that the patch has gradually grown. We've got about 30 or so now. But I put this one up first as a wildflower that undoubtedly I would think everybody like me would be delighted to have. I was really pleased to get them. But when it comes to biodiversity, they're actually not just quite so important. And some of these other plants you can see around them are probably more important. In the picture there, I can see valerian and marsh bedstraw there, and quite a range of different other things, and they're probably more valuable for wildlife. So what I'm going to look at now is some of the really common plants which are actually the best. They're the very best things for wildlife. We need to look after our common plants and keep them common. And I just have to say that it was shocking to find out some years ago the charity Plant Life looked at local extinctions in various parts of the UK, and I thought places like Cambridgeshire, Suffolk, places down in the south and east of England would have the greatest local extinctions. Sadly, Aberdeenshire North came top of the poll for the greatest number of local extinctions. So anything we can do to prevent extinction would be a really good idea. Could I have the next slide, please? So here's quite a common plant. You'll all have seen it by the roadside. This is yarrow. And yarrow is a super plant for wildlife. It's got a huge list. I'm not going to show you shots of things like nettles and dandelions, which you've all seen. But if I say yarrow's in the same league as them, which is incredibly good for a wide range of insect species. And when we talk about the numbers of insects, we're just talking about the plant feeding insects. So on this one, for example, it's well over 100, but of course many other species of insects feed on those plant feeding insects. So it's really important. And interestingly, of course, all my photographs are going to show insects on the flowers, which is what we all notice and see. But actually, a lot of the importance of our wild plants is in supporting the insects that actually feed on the plants. Next slide, please. Now, this is a kind of interesting plant, and I suspect it was one that is still pretty common, but we're losing it. I think we're losing it for a couple of reasons. It's Devil's Bit scabious, and I certainly, if anybody wants to see Devil's Bit scabious in all its glory, go to Haddo Country Park in around about July into August. And it's doing incredibly well there still. But I think we're losing it for a couple of reasons. One is the just increase in nitrates in the atmosphere. The great increase in nitrogen means that other species outcompete it, and it can't cope. It's not a great competitor. What also helps it is the presence of rabbits, because they eat the competitive plants, but they don't eat the Devil's Bit scabious, and that's why I think it does well at Haddo, for example. But obviously, I think with rabbit hemorrhagic disease and myxomatosis, our rabbit population is not as high as it once was. But it's certainly one I can recommend. It's a beautiful plant and really important for wildlife. And next slide, please. And here's one that I don't think there's any doubt that a lot of people would call a weed. It's called, and the name certainly suggests that, it's called mugwort. And I would say it's another one very high up on the list of how many insect species it supports. And I think that a lot of people are wary of planting plants, wild plants, in case they suddenly take over their whole garden. What I can say about mugwort is that I've had it in the garden for quite a few years, and we've still only got about 10 or 12 plants. It definitely doesn't take over. Next slide, please. And finally, in this wee section, you can't actually see much of this flower that this painted lady is sitting on, but I'm slightly treading on Alex's toes because she's going to go onto ponds. This is kind of pond edge plant. It's water mint, and if you've got anywhere where you can grow water mint, I really recommend it because it is a fantastic attractor for butterflies late in summer. It comes into flower around about the end of August, beginning of September, and I find I literally get dozens of painted ladies, peacocks, small tortoiseshells, red admirals on it. And I know the butterfly bush is famous for that, but this one's a true native. Next, I think the next slide will go on to another section. Now, I wonder, I'm guessing that probably some people, some of you have smaller gardens, so I thought we'd stick in a short section on what we could grow in a small garden and perhaps just in a container. So next slide, please. This one here is again in our garden, and it's growing in a container. It's been in a barrel for, I would say, about 12 years, and every summer it comes out like this. Every July we get this display. This is called Hairy St. John's wort, and I've found I've had to do very little maintenance except occasionally remember to water it. So that's certainly one I can recommend. And you can see a couple of other plants around it, like meadow cranesbill and water avens, which surprisingly, given the name, grows well in containers, I find. Next slide, please. And this is also in a container in the garden. This is a local wildflower, but quite not widely distributed. It's marjoram, and we find it in the southeast of Aberdeenshire and also up around Tom and Towel area. It tends to prefer lime, but actually I've found it growing in other places. Once it's established, it seems to be okay, even in our more acid soils. And just a matter of interest, the moth that's just taken off is silver Y, day-flying moth. Next slide, please. And just another, I've got many more suggestions for containers, but these are just a few examples, and this is thrift. So that's just some examples for containers. Oh yes, sorry, I've just been reminded that a customer recently bought some of these to plant in a dry stone dike she's building. So there's another idea if you happen to be putting a wall around the garden. Thank you, Alex. Next slide. This is my last section, and it deals with an area probably everybody's got a bit of lawn. So if we look at the first slide, Alex, we have a picture of our garden, which, let's face it, if you were the chief groundsman on the Wimbledon Centre Court, you'd be a bit shocked. But in our lawn contains, as you can see, the purple flower is self-heal. There's also creeping buttercup in there. There's a wee bit of clover, and we've also got yarrow, although I don't think there's any in that shot, but just a whole range that we've gradually introduced. And on that subject, and I think there's already been a question about this, but on that subject it isn't easy to introduce wildflowers into lawns, because even though the grass looks short, the roots have a mighty hold on everything underground, and they've probably been there for years. So expecting a seed to be able to come out and cope with that is quite difficult. So I've tended to plant plugs. If we could have the next slide, please. And some people, most of the shots have been in my own garden, but this one is nearby garden, somebody with a much larger garden than me, and they came to me, this is about 15 or 16 years ago, they came to me and asked, could they have a wildflower area in the garden? And I planted about 1,200 plants of about 20 different species in that area. I would guess there's now roughly 30 to 40 species and probably tens, hundreds of thousands of wildflowers. And note that there's hardly any grass in it, and that stays the same till this day. I mentioned meadows at the start of all this, and I think meadows are an agricultural thing, and they had very much a purpose, which was to provide good hay. And people talk about creating meadows when I don't really think that's the appropriate word. And I think I talk about creating wildflower areas like this. I've got one last one to show, Alex. And this is just this is nearby area actually, and you can see I planted various white flowers in there. I didn't plant the nearest yellow flower, which is ragwort, which is much criticized, of course, basically because of worries about horses eating it. Actually, horses, as I understand it, would never eat it unless it's either starving or it's been put into hay. But ragwort is a fantastic plant for insects, and I certainly would tolerate a bit in my garden. If you don't want it to seed, you just make sure you pull it out before it gets to the seeding stage. And I think I might have one last slide, Alex, possibly. Oh, no,
same picture.
Yeah, because it's not quite the same. Yep, but that's just a different shot of the same area. But thank you all very much for listening, and good luck with your wildlife gardening. And if ever anybody wants any help or suggestions, feel free to ask. Thank you.
So ponds and water. So we've got another video from Doug.
Ponds are of course valuable homes for frogs and newts, aquatic insects like dragonflies and water beetles, and are a source of drinking water for mammals, birds and bees. Ensure that within your pond you grow some emergent plants like reeds or irises to allow the larvae of dragon and damselflies to crawl out of the water to transform into adults.
So ponds, as I said, are a wonderful thing. Every living thing needs water to survive, so not just amphibians, but insects, birds, and mammals too. A good pond has a couple of different characteristics. It should be in a sunny location for the majority of the day, and preferably not under any big trees, which tend to drop all their leaves into it. Varying depths of water will allow for more wildlife, but even a very shallow pond can be useful. It's more important to make sure that there is easy access for wildlife both in and out of the pond. So please, no cliffs on your pond. It needs to have access for wildlife to leave as well as to go in. And of course, having a variety of native plants for different depths of your pond is important. So things like emergent plants coming out of the water, and also submerged plants underneath is very good for wildlife. Does size matter? Well, yes and no. So a bigger pond has more potential for variety in its structure, and it will have more edges for wildlife to use. Some animals, such as frogs, will only ever overwinter in the bottom of your pond if it's a certain depth and width. However, even a small prefabricated or shallow pond can still get things such as froggy visitors. And you'll find on the screen that I've circled some frogs beside some very small ponds or shallow dishes of water there. So even a very small amount of water can be very useful. If you don't have space for a small pond, then consider adding things like a bird bath and a dish filled with pebbles and rainwater. So it's best to have something at ground level, and you can also have something higher up. Insects, mammals and birds can use both of these to drink, and you just need to make sure that you clean it on a semi-regular basis. So we have a video from Doug.
It is important to think about the structure of the habitats you are creating. It is good to have a diversity of structure with dense twiggy hedges to provide shelter and nesting sites, some shrubs to simulate a scrub habitat, and open areas with long grass, shorter vegetation and some bare soil. Don't neglect your garden and house walls either. If your masonry is suitable, you can grow shrubs and climbers against walls or fences. Dry stone walls in the garden also make excellent habitats for wrens, bumblebees, reptiles, and small mammals. I replaced the Leylandii with a hedge of mixed native tree species, mostly hawthorn, with bird cherry, blackthorn, elder, rowan, gean, hazel, and holly. These are trimmed only every couple of years to allow them to flower and to fruit, to provide food for small mammals and birds, as well as nesting habitat and shelter. I have planted climbers like ivy, wild rose and honeysuckle in the hedge to add colour and a source of nectar and fruit. Ivy in particular creates a fantastic habitat, full of spiders and other invertebrates. It provides an excellent nesting site for a variety of birds, and I have had blackbirds, thrushes, wood pigeons, wrens and spotted flycatchers nesting in the ivy in my garden. Ivy flowers in late autumn and winter and is a good source of nectar at a time when nectar is scarce. The berries are also very high in energy and are sought after by thrushes and blackbirds.
So I would really encourage everyone to make more use of their garden walls. It really doesn't matter what type of walls you have, they can all become a home for wildlife. So the plants I have mentioned on the screen there, they can be easily trained up your wall or fence directly, or you can use things like trellises if you don't want them directly touching the wall. The plants are useful not only when flowering, but also in providing things like fruit later on in the year and a habitat for many different animal species. One thing that people rarely think about is making a hole in their fences. Now, obviously you need permission from things like neighbors as well. So don't just haphazardly go and cutting a wall in your fence, a hole in your fence. But even adding a very small hole, only about 13 centimeters by 13 centimeters, will help wildlife access your garden. So that size is specifically for hedgehogs, and people sometimes call these hedgehog highways. So animal homes and feeding. So we've got another poll coming up. So Tom, if you can launch that one for me, please. So you can tick multiple choices on here. We just wondered how many different things that you have in your garden already. There's lots of votes coming in. That's really good. Okay, we'll maybe publish that poll there, Tom. And share the results. Perfect. So it looks like most people have some bird feeders and insect homes. Also bird boxes are the next most popular. Feeding stations for other animals, bat boxes and other animal homes come slightly further down the list. Perfect. So we'll close that one down. So there we go. Ideally, an established wildlife garden will already have lots of different animal habitats and food sources. However, you can help things along by adding more. Homes such as bird boxes can be quite specific to the type of bird nesting there. The shape and the size of hole into the box, where you place the box, whether it's sheltered or exposed, depends on what types of birds you want living there. So take a look at what visits your garden specifically, and you can plan bird boxes accordingly with that. Birds like swifts, swallows, and house martins have declined dramatically in recent years. So if you have any in your local area, it would be really good to add these to your house. The bottom left picture is an example of a bat box. Now, normally these are sited quite high up in tall trees, and you would site multiple different ones facing slightly different directions. The bottom right picture is an example of a toad home, and these would be placed in quiet, damp, and dark areas of your garden. So kind of in the undergrowth of some shrubbery. Some animal home designs have not been very well thought out, and at their worst, they can actually be a danger for some animals. So we recommend sticking to designs that are approved by places such as the RSPB, as opposed to ones that you would find in your supermarket or a big online store. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to go to the RSPB website to buy them, but just try and make sure that you're using designs that they are happy with using, so that we don't endanger any wildlife by accident. In terms of insect homes, in my opinion, the best homes are always natural. So things like log piles, leaf piles, piles of stones, compost heaps, etc. Again, the science behind how effective some bug hotel designs are is not wonderful. Bigger is not always better. So there's lots of designs out there with things like pallets full with insect-friendly materials. Now, I would say that a large variety of different insects don't naturally tend to live all in one very small location. So sometimes it can lead to things like predation. So I would go smaller is better for your insect homes if you're adding them to your garden. In terms of animal feeding, now some people do this religiously, every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. That's one strategy. The proviso is that you really need to make sure that you clean your feeders regularly. Otherwise, you risk feeders being a source of disease for animals and actually causing more harm than good just by accident. The food should also not be there for long periods of time uneaten, so make sure that it's fresh food that you're putting out regularly. You need to remember it's not just seeds that birds need throughout the year. So things like our blue tit that needs thousands of caterpillars while raising their young. So putting out food needs to be balanced with making sure that you have enough insect life in your garden. Feeding can work also just as a booster when the weather is particularly bad outside. Now this could be because it's too hot, too cold, it's been particularly dry, or particularly wet outside. It's very dependent on the weather. And it can help tide animals over when their normal food sources are quite scarce. You should always tailor your food to the specific animal visitors that you have in your garden to try and avoid harming anything accidentally. So some animals, for example, are quite specific with what they eat. Things like hedgehogs. I've got a picture of some kitten biscuits there and a bowl of water. So they're quite specific in the food that they have. You can also feed them meaty cat or dog food, but avoiding some fish and gravy varieties. And they definitely drink water, not milk, as some people still like to say. Milk can actually make them very ill. So if you do plan on feeding any wildlife, just have a quick check online to make sure you're definitely feeding them the right things. The last section that I have is on pests and planting. So we're going to get a bit existential here. Define a pest. Well, you may respond with something like, something which is eating my plants. However, if we're being true wildlife gardeners, we need to start to relax about this and accept some small losses. Those pests are still part of a food chain, and instead of reaching for chemicals, I'd encourage you to have some patience. More often than not, a healthy garden will have enough pest predators, such as the animals I've got on the screen there, And these animals should be able to take care of any extreme pest problems. It might just take them a couple of days to realize that you actually have a problem. Remember, everything's part of the food chain. So all those aphids that are eating your lovely flowering plants, they're food for things like birds. If you particularly can't stand it any longer, then we would recommend trying things like hand removal. So removing the pest species with your hand, and also using a very mild natural soapy solution in a spray. So instead of using something like fairy liquid, you could use Castile soap liquid instead, mixed with water. So I'm never going to encourage the use of pesticides or herbicides in a garden setting, and there's very good reasons for this. And that also includes the ones that are marketed as being all natural. Quite often, natural doesn't mean better for the environment in terms of pesticides. So pesticides often have unintended consequences because they're often not very specific. So they affect multiple creatures, both big and small. They persist in soil and water for years to come, and will poison things that you do not expect. It's worth noting that things like bedding plants, often brought from supermarkets or larger garden centres, will often have had pesticides sprayed on them at some point in growing. So even when you don't actually add any chemicals yourself to your garden, there will be small quantities present if you're buying things from there. To get around this, you can always try and grow things from seed yourself, or try and share different plants from areas where you know chemicals haven't been used. My last point on chemicals is to please make sure that you dispose of any that you have properly. Now, I'm betting if anyone has a look in their old garden shed or garage, you will find bottles of some mysterious chemicals that haven't been used for quite a while. Please, please never put any down the drain, whether it's inside or outside. Even small amounts can kill aquatic creatures from miles downstream. So I tried to put in a couple of different images there of people accidentally putting things down the drain and killing lots of animals. The way to get rid of them is to instead look up your council website and find the nearest local dump which deals with hazardous chemicals specifically. So there will be information on your council website. This is my very last slide. When planting, it's best to go for peat-free compost, although this can be very hard to find, and sometimes labels can be very misleading. To me personally, it's insanity that we're still actively digging up areas of peatland in Scotland. Peatland is a rare habitat in its own right globally and can act as a huge carbon sink, helping us fight things like climate change. When you dig it up for using in compost, however, you go the other way and release lots of carbon into the atmosphere. I'm a big fan of having a compost bin in your garden. It can be something that you've made yourself, or it can be one of these prefabricated plastic ones that you find. Compost bins are wonderful for helping reduce some household and garden waste. You want mainly a mix of brown items in there and a smaller proportion of green items, including things like fruit and veg scraps from your kitchen. So again, this is something that we could literally do an entire talk on, composting. That's just a very basic message there, but compost bins are quite good for reducing your waste that you're putting out there. My very last point is one that often people have the most trouble with, and to try and avoid tidying too much. So making our gardens wildlife friendly means allowing insects a place to live by leaving them the habitats that they do well in. So when I'm thinking about that, I think about areas of deadwood, areas of rocks and stones that you have, and especially things like gathering leaves. So if you really do have to tidy and you can't cope with it looking untidy, what I'd say is I'd recommend you to put all those things in one specific area. So you could have a hidden away part of your garden, maybe beside some big shrubs or trees. And that's where you put your logs or your rocks or things like that. You can keep all the leaves together in one specific area and let them rot down. But please do keep these natural areas that insects love to stay in your garden. So try not to tidy too much. Now, it should be less work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people want to do it if that's what they've done their entire lives. So I'll just put up the slide again on how to put your questions into the chat. So Lena, do we have any questions first of all? I'm not sure where the top of the list starts.
Yeah, we have quite a few questions actually. We have one that was sent in advance from Patricia, and it basically asks about wildlife-friendly meadows. Without digging up existing turf and starting from scratch, what can you do with grass that's very short, scarified and sown with yellow rattle in November?
So I would maybe pass that to John as our wildflower expert. Is that okay, John?
Yep, I'm happy with that. Well, you've done the right thing in planting, in putting the yellow rattle seed in. If you can bear to wait, it's probably better to wait until it has an effect on the grass. Because I think, as I mentioned in my talk, you know, people tend to look at short grass and think, oh yeah, wildflowers are growing amongst that. But what you've actually got is very years of root growth that anything coming in has to compete with. I think it's asking a lot of most plant seeds to come up in that situation, and I would personally plant in plugs. But as I say, the other thing you could do is wait and see how well the yellow rattle works, and once that thins things out, you could either plant plugs or try seeds. Hope that answers that one.
Can I add something? I've been doing a very similar project in my garden, and it's taking years. I started 5 years ago. The yellow rattle was quite successful. Every year it gets better and better, and every year I add a few more species. So it's a long-term project, but so just be patient and don't expect to get something that looks like the picture on the seed packet. It takes a while.
I would second that. I would say that quite often things don't turn out quite the way you want. Maybe one or two species do well and others fail for no apparent reason that you can think of. So it is a process, and it does take a while to happen, but very heavily scarifying. And like you said, using yellow rattle will definitely help the process. Okay.
Okay. Some follow-up questions also from Patricia. Where would you get plugs? I'm assuming we can pass that one to John as well.
Well, I grow plugs, but funny enough, I'm finding I will soon not cope with the demand. And actually, what I would suggest to everybody is get out there, collect seed, and grow your own plants into plugs is the ideal, and then you've got truly local plants. And the trouble is that it goes on what Doug was saying, that obviously it requires an element of patience, that you're not going to change things overnight if you have to do that. But the only other thing I would say is to try to get as local provenance as possible. Get your plugs as local as possible. And I'm quite happy to talk to anybody about that at a later stage. I'm not sure how that would work, Alex, but if anybody wants to talk to me about how we can do that, I'm happy to come back on that.
Yeah, so just to note that if we don't get through any questions tonight, you can always send them into the email address that you were getting things sent out from. So NESBiP@hutton.ac.uk. So everyone should have that email somewhere if you go back onto Eventbrite. So you can always send in your questions that way, and you can also get in touch with John via that, so I can pass anything on to him. But yes, I would second the fact that we're really wanting to encourage people to responsibly source some wildflower seed locally and try and grow what grows well locally here. So yes, there are differences even in the same species between what you would find in the south of England and the plants that we have up here in our local area. So the ones up here are adapted to living in the northeast of Scotland. They do better, they come out at the right time of year. So that's what we're talking about when we speak about local provenance. So local wildflower seed from beside you is going to do much better than something from a packet that might possibly be from as far away as America or right away across Europe. So just to be careful of that.
I second that.
Yeah.
Okay. This next one I think is for John as well. Carolyn and Richard has asked, they have a great wildflower variety, however they also have lots of dock. Is dock useful at all, or do we need to root it out as we don't want to spray it?
Well, I think Karen and Richard have answered their own questions there. I know a lot of people have dock problems, and I was only asked about it just the other day. Somebody had sprayed all their docks, and the following year they've got even more docks, and that's the problem. The spraying's not good because it kills other things, and it also doesn't actually get rid of the problem. The main thing is to stop the seeding of the docks in the first place, and you can cut them. We certainly had a lot of dockins in our garden when we first came here, and it's just been hard work gradually digging them up and getting rid of them. And I doubt if we'll ever completely eradicate them, but we've certainly got very few now. So yeah, you have my sympathies for that problem, but they do have things that feed on them, is the other point. And I think there's a dock leaf beetle that's pretty effective at eating them. And
Bright green.
Yeah, yes, and I've seen that fairly locally. I've seen that near to Doug on the River Don in beside the River Don in Inverurie area. I've seen a lot of beetles, so they are around, and maybe you want to go and collect a few and put them in your garden. Just a thought.
Did you have anything to add there?
Just that docks are a very, a successional species of bare ground, really. If you can put up with them for 7 or 8 years, they will eventually disappear as other things develop. So that's their role in the ecology. They've got very deep taproot. They bring up minerals from the subsoil and then eventually die back and release those minerals into the soil.
Yep.
So learn to love them.
And there certainly are insects that eat them, and I see Ewan's just put up a small copper butterfly. Caterpillars will certainly eat dockins as well as sorrel.
Perfect.
Okay. We have a question for Lorna, who asks, her pond is in serious need of maintenance and needs help. Can anyone recommend a company who does these sorts of things?
Oh,
I have done that sort of thing in the past. Very hard work. I'd be happy to advise on that if there was a way that that I could be sent photographs, for example, for a start.
I'm personally wondering what's wrong with the pond, just in terms of what the problem is, so we can try and identify that. But I know that Doug does have a very lovely wildlife pond.
I've also got a set of waders that I put on and get in. You're perfectly welcome to borrow them.
I do my pond at this time of the year. I think this is the time to do it precisely now. If that's any help to you.
Yeah, before the tadpoles hatch, lift up the spawn, put it in a bucket, clear your pond out, only maybe a third of it, definitely no more than a half of it. And then you can lift the spawn back in and leave it for the rest of the year.
Very good. Yep.
Oh, I think Lorna just got back on the chat saying the pond liner is cracked and I think it needs replaced. So that's quite a big job, in terms of emptying your pond out for a while, fixing that issue, and then trying to put as much back in as possible. So I'm thinking waders, many buckets, and a bit of building work going on, unfortunately.
Okay, we'll move on to a question from Victoria. She says she's looking for a climber that might be able to go over a gate, possibly giving edible fruit, but also interested in a flowering climber for an allotment garden.
The edible fruit bit, edible for what, I think might be a question. I find it harder to think of ones that are edible for us, but certainly for birds and things, there's very obviously honeysuckle's an obvious one. Another one I'd recommend is bittersweet, Solanum dulcamara, also known as woody nightshade. And that has beautiful flowers and red berries. It's a bit scrambly, but I certainly like it.
Okay, and a question from Fiona. How do I discourage birds from using my pond as a flyby takeaway and eating every tadpole and froglet that appears?
Well, at this time of year, I cover the pond with some reinforcing mesh, the kind of metal grid that you get from builders merchants that you use if you want to lay a garage slab. I have 2 bits that I've cut up, and they each cover half the pond, and 2 of us can easily lift them over. So that's what I do. I cover my pond with a metal mesh.
That's much more sensible than our method. We just have to, one of us has to run out and chase the birds away.
Chase the heron away.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say that part of having a wildlife garden is accepting that some things do eat other things. It can be quite sad when you've waited all year for the frogs to come and lay their spawn in there, and you have a look in and something like a heron has visited and eaten absolutely everything. But it is that kind of circle of life, that extended food web. So yes, you can definitely cover up parts of the pond, but it's not the worst thing in the world that your things are being eaten by other animals.
Agreed.
Okay, we move on to a question from Donna and Ronnie. How can we get rid of New Zealand flatworm? We had an infestation last year.
Ooh, that's a very, very tricky one there.
Well, ground beetles actually eat the eggs of flatworms. So if you're prepared to squish the adults with your boot sole when you lift up a pot, for instance, and find them there, if you encourage beetles through having log piles and things like that, and habitat piles, hopefully you'll eventually achieve a kind of ecological balance, and there'll be enough beetles to keep the flatworms in check. You'll probably never get rid of them entirely, but at least they'll be under control.
I've no experience of flatworms, fortunately, but I did understand there was a possibility of once they really expand hugely in numbers very quickly, but after a few years they start to disappear again for whatever reason.
I think they do.
Yeah, their ecology makes it quite tricky to completely get rid of them. So like Doug was saying, you can have a look for the adults and also the eggs and try and physically get rid of those by unfortunately crushing them. But the way that they work is they tend to eat the earthworms that we have in the soil. When they run out of a food source, they're able to bury deep down in the soil, and they stay there, and they go in kind of an equivalent of a semi sort of hibernating state. So they can actually last for a very long time hidden in the soil without any food until the earthworm population comes back, and then they'll wake up and start eating the worms again. So it does have to be kind of removal at the top surface, unfortunately. Not a very pleasant job, but one that should always be done.
Okay. We have a question from Katie who asks, have you any suggestions for good plants to put in ponds?
Yeah, I could deal with that, Alex. I saw that question, and I've just written down 20 species. I'm not going to read them all out, but 20 species we've got around the pond. The marginal plants are relatively easy, and you could give a list of those. It's whether if you're looking for aquatic species to go underwater, that's more tricky, and in some cases it might be better to wait to see what comes in naturally. But I'm sure you don't actually want me to read out a list of 20 species, so we can maybe put that in writing somewhere, Alex.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we can add that to the website, have a list of good species. I was thinking that one of the documents that we have on the website, the Creating Environmentally Friendly Gardens by the late Bob Davis, that's going to be up there, and he has some pond species listed in there. So we've already got some, but we'll make sure that we add some more there.
Well, as I say, we've got 20 marginal species around our ponds. That gives you an idea. There's a fair bit to play with.
Okay, another pond question here. Alan asks a question about duckweed. He says they have a small pond on the allotment with frogs and newts and an absolute infestation of duckweed. Is it best to try and keep some open water during the summer months or not?
I think so. I scoop out some of the duckweed with the back of a lawn rake. I have a plastic lawn rake that's just the ideal weight and size for scooping out the duckweed. So in summer, I sometimes leave the rake by the pond so that whenever I walk past, I just reach in with it and scoop some out.
I think my only comment is I've just mentioned how many marginal plants we have. I think we've got plants come out all over the pond, and they tend to shade out the duckweed. We definitely have duckweed, but it's not a problem because there's other species out competing it.
Yeah, I don't think it's a huge problem in ponds. Every now and again, I would maybe remove about a third of it and then just leave it to come back again.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. And Linda asks, can you add wood ash to your compost heap, or should it be kept separate and added as a top dressing to the garden?
Well, personally, I add it as a top dressing, but especially around fruit trees at this time of the year. But it's probably okay in a compost, but I don't know.
I don't know either. I add it to the vegetable plot as a top dressing. So yeah, I've never actually tried it on the compost heap.
I don't actually have any source of wood ash, so I can't comment on either one there, but I would take John and Doug's advice.
Okay. Next question's from Lily, who asks, what is essential for hedgehogs living in a semi-urban environment?
Well, their home range can actually be quite a distance, so they can travel up to about 2 kilometers a night. They obviously travel more when they're looking for food. So if your garden isn't very big on things like slugs or beetles or worms, then they will have to travel further to more gardens. When they're mating, they will obviously be traveling further to look for the opposite sex. But I think it depends on things like if you have the ability for them to move between different areas quite easily, if you have different insect life there, maybe also if people are feeding them at specific times of year. So if they come out of hibernation early, we have a lot of people in our wildlife gardening group who are quite keen on feeding the hedgehogs and making sure there's enough food supply for them there. So I think that all those factors together are quite important.
I've nothing to add to that. I don't think, Alex. We've got hedgehogs in the garden, luckily, but it's probably just because we've got lots of slugs.
Okay. The next question is from Donna and Ronnie again. They say that they have badgers visiting the gardens, and some neighbours are afraid that the badgers are terrorising their cats and doing lots of damage to the lawns. Whilst they're happy for it to visit and deal with any damage, should we be encouraging the badger to visit? A number of residents have advocated spraying entry points with JS fluid, which is not something they would be happy to use. Do you have any advice?
I don't like having badgers in my garden. I have them at the top of the garden, which is fairly wild. And I have that section gated off because I don't want them anywhere near my vegetable patch digging up my tatties. So yeah, I don't encourage them into the garden, but so far I've been able to tolerate them. Yeah, I wouldn't put food out for them.
Maybe I can actually, as a member of Scottish Badgers, I could probably advise it's probably best to not encourage them to come into the garden. But if they do, and if you're happy for them to just do their thing and leave, I would just leave it at that. They will find food wherever they can, and then we shouldn't be encouraging them to rely on artificial food sources through the year.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, and another question from Donna and Ronnie is, what plants would you recommend for a banking that is basically just sand?
Ooh.
Would that be your thrift, John? And your coastal wildflowers?
Yes, yes. I would think things like thrift and sand. Yep. Or,
Maybe some kidney vetch?
kidney vetch. Well done, Alex. That sounds like a perfect one, especially if it's sort of fairly unstable. We don't use kidney vetch in doing wildflower areas because they tend to be quite stable soil, and the kidney vetch will get out competed. But if you've got fairly unstable bank with sand, kidney vetch is a great one, and of course it's food plant a small blue butterfly. So you never know. But yeah, I think the thing to do is go and look at similar areas where there's lots of sand and see what native plants we got growing there.
And collect some seed.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
White campion comes to mind as another one in that sort of situation.
Okay, thank you. I will move on to a question from Gregor, who says, how would you encourage wildlife without encouraging mice, etc., which leads to issues with neighbours in a shared space?
That can be quite tricky, especially if you do things like regularly feed the birds. You can tend to move your area of feeding away from the houses, so you're not trying to encourage them directly into the houses. I would encourage people to make sure that the area that you store your food for different wildlife, that's in like a metal container. I've had lots of mice chew through even very, very strong plastic, really useful boxes. They'll chew through most things eventually, but trying to keep your food source away from where the mice can easily get to it is a good one. But I don't know, I've never really had much success with things like ultrasonic emitters that you're supposed to put inside your kitchen, for example, or something, to try and discourage mice from coming in there. I don't have any other pets at home all the time, and I wouldn't use ultrasonic if I did have other pets, but I know some people do find them quite useful. I don't know if John and Doug have any other advice.
Well, I think wood mice are going to be everywhere anyway, and we only worry about them if they get in the house, and we use live traps and take them at least a mile away because that's their size of their home range, and that's all you can do is sort of reduce the population if it gets too high, ideally by live trapping them. But I can't. Obviously, yeah, if you feed birds, you're going to attract in mice and possibly rats. But that's personally why I just tend to feed the birds when they really, really need it, not all year.
Okay. I have a question from Jane, who asks, which native insect-friendly plants can cope with a mostly shaded patch?
Oh, I'll answer that. The one that comes to my mind, and I didn't mention it in my slides, but it's a favourite plant of mine is red campion, and it definitely can cope with shade. And I should just add a little story about red campion. I have a lot of bishopweed in the garden, which ground elder in the books, and I've gradually replaced it with red campion, and once the red campion grows up, the bishopweed can't come back. So I think it's an excellent one for sort of shady areas. The other one, but it's one that people don't always like, is Herb Robert. which would definitely grow in that sort of situation. It's a beautiful, beautiful plant, but some people don't like it because it can really spread. But there again, something's got to be growing on the ground. So why not a beautiful native plant like herb Robert? Anybody else, any thoughts?
No, I think that's really good. I was thinking maybe of shaded areas. If it was shaded by trees, then you could add things like bluebells or snowdrops as other bulbs for earlier in the year.
Yes, I've got wild garlic, and something we haven't mentioned at all. Of course, is quite a lot of our local wildflowers are actually edible by us, and there's a good example. Wild garlic is really lovely and tasty, and several of the flowers I showed in my wee talk are edible, of course, in various ways. Watermint, I mentioned, is very much edible. Yarrow is, and marjoram, of course. So yeah. But that's getting away from the original question, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Sarah is asking, do you need to line ponds with a plastic liner, or is there any way to make a pond without need for plastic?
Well, it depends where you're putting the pond, I think. But we have ponds in our garden. There's no liner, and that's, I think, the ideal. If you're lucky enough to be in a place where there's enough clay to hold the water, that's the ideal answer. Otherwise, you probably do need to have a liner. It's a lot of people ask me questions about ponds, and one of the things I do point out is that a natural pond might well dry out in the summer. Obviously, a lined one won't, but a natural pond dries out, and our native pond life is all adapted to the fact that the pond could well dry out in midsummer. So there's not a problem there. But I other than clay, and I do think that's quite a difficult one to do, but it's very difficult to avoid getting either plastic or rubber liner.
Okay, thank you. And here's a question from Jean. She says, have you got any suggestions for how to plant a turf roof on a porch? Could we use existing turf from the garden, and could we introduce wildflower plugs?
I would say that I don't actually have any experience of planting a turf roof, so I'm a little bit limited there, but perhaps it's not too different from trying to start off a wildflower lawn. I don't know. John and Doug, do you know?
I've no experience either, but I think that their own two suggestions sound fine to me. I mean, you know, if you've got a light enough soil, use the plants you've already got, and you could certainly add plugs to it. The classic plant they use on turf roofs, of course, are the sedums, the wild sedums, and you know, there'll be ones to look into. But my experience of seeing other people's efforts at these turf roofs is it's fine until you get a very long dry spell, and then they can look a bit sad. So that might be something to consider, is the need to water them in very dry spells.
Okay. Anne asks, what would you recommend for planting under trees or hawthorn hedging? It's an exposed Aberdeenshire garden surrounded by farmland.
I think typical woodland spring flowering plants, bluebells, primroses, wild garlic. Wood sorrel maybe. I'd be tempted to go along that kind of line myself.
I'll add a couple to that, Doug. Lesser celandine, cowslip. Yep. As I mentioned earlier, red campion, herb Robert. There's quite a lot of species that can stand that semi-shade.
This could possibly be something we could also put a list of something on the website.
Yep.
Okay, a little bit of a different question from Masha. She asks, is it okay to grow wild plants in public areas, or is it only all right in privately owned gardens?
Guerrilla planting.
Yeah.
Go for it. Don't tell anyone I said that.
Yeah, so you need to have landowner permission, generally is the party line. But yes, we should be encouraging native wildflowers into lots of different areas. Part of the work that the partnership does is try and improve things like local green spaces for biodiversity with help from things like the ranger services that Doug is part of. So you might find that locally near you, different parts of the park areas, green spaces aren't being cut as regularly anymore. That's not just because people can't be bothered cutting them or just because they couldn't cut them last year. It's because we're trying to improve wildflowers in areas like public green spaces. So we are trying to get more in there. But yeah, I'll stay silent on whether you should do that yourself.
I would add the proviso that I think it's important to get the right plant in the right place and the right habitat in the right place. So you really need to be aware of the surrounding habitat types, the climates, the soil type, and plant accordingly. And that can require some ecological expertise and the ability to do a basic plant survey or a phase 1 habitat survey, for example. But the Ranger Service can sometimes advise on things like that.
Okay, thank you. Marianne's asking, how can you control or eliminate creeping thistle when it takes over an area?
It is a nice one for wildlife, I would say.
Yeah.
Lots of butterflies and insects really do like creeping thistle. I think that was one of our species we were looking out for last summer, wasn't it, Doug?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say if it's getting too much, try and manage it before it flowers. Obviously, it does spread on the ground, but yeah, if you can reduce the number of seeds, that's a start. But try and keep some of it.
I just can picture hundreds of painted ladies on creeping thistle, which is a wonderful sight, and there's certainly a compensation for having creeping thistle.
Okay, Marianne also asks, would honeysuckle be better than clematis in a Scottish coastal location?
I can give a slightly sideways answer to that and say honeysuckle's better than clematis because it's native. But not sure about the coastal situation.
Yeah, I don't know how salt hardy either of those plants are because I'm not directly by the coast.
No.
I don't know. Sorry.
Take a walk along the coast and see if you see either of them. That's all I can recommend.
Okay. John is asking about living walls. He's looking to create one, and are there any suggestions of wildlife valuable plants suitable to grow in containers and pots?
Oh, just to say, we'll make this one the last question because that's almost the end of our session. I do have one more poll to do after we've done with this question, and I'll just do some closing remarks after that. Sorry, I should have kept an eye on the time there. I was enjoying myself too much.
I think there's quite a few species that will grow in that situation. Personally, on my walls, we've got a lot of ground ivy, which kind of spreads on runners right down the walls. But there's quite a lot of other species that, again, maybe we should get a list together for everybody and put it up on the website.
Yeah, I think that would be very welcome, I think, of different sort of situations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, various saxifrages and sedums will be quite happy on walls as well.
Yep.
Maybe alpine type plants as well.
Perfect.
Okay, I think that would be all the questions then.
Okay, just to say, if we haven't been able to get through your question tonight, sorry, we've just run out of time there. Lena, I think, has been doing a fantastic job of gathering a list of them. So depending on if you really, really want an answer, you could always use the NESBiP email address that I will type into the chat right now for you. and you can pass on your questions that way. Oh, for some reason that was just Helena, 2 seconds. There we go. Hopefully that's in the chat for everyone there. If you would really like your question answered, because I don't have your personal details to get back to you otherwise, if you make sure you email that address there. So I'm just going to do one more quick poll, hopefully with Tom's help, on what you would like any future talks or events to focus on. So that should be coming up on your screen just now. So we've got a variety of different options there. If you're still around, if we've not lost you already, if we can try and get you to have a little vote on that. Because we've covered so much this evening on quite a shallow level. We want to make sure that we're delivering what it is that you want. Excellent, lots of people voting. Perfect, so we'll maybe end that poll there and we can share the results.
Wow.
So I think, oh, there we go. The biggest one is collecting wildflower seeds locally. So that'll be us, John. We're definitely on, hopefully, for later this year or whenever we're allowed to do that.
we have a plan for one later this year, and it's worth anybody keeping an eye on the OWLNEG Facebook page, and that's OWLNEG Facebook page. Is that right, Doug? Is that where they'll get it? That we'll put it on there when we know a date.
Oh, Doug, you're muted.
We can put the link up on the website.
Yep.
Perfect. So yes, apart from that, it was wildlife friendly plants, sowing and managing wildflowers, creating a wildlife pond, and I think the least positive was the animal homes and feeding. Perfect. So I'll just close that one down. So I just had some final remarks. It was just to say thank you very much for everyone who came along tonight. Thank you to my co-hosts and the people who have been clicking all the buttons behind the scenes for me. So Tom and Lena. We very much know that we've only touched the surface on lots of subjects. Next week, by the time I've got all this information online for you and those extra things we talked about, you will be able to find more information on nesbiodiversity.org.uk. You can also have a look just now at our Facebook page and our wildlife gardening group. And I'm also going to be sending out a link via the Eventbrite emailing system on a feedback form for just having taken part in a Climate Week Northeast event. So lots to do there just now. Definitely look out for when things are ready next week on the website. I'll email about that as well. And you can have a look on our Facebook page. But a huge thank you to everyone who took part tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Okay, so I will stop recording just now, and I hope everyone has a very nice evening.